It's a pleasure for me to be chair of the conference of Professor Alex KALACHE, who will talk about equity. Professor KALACHE is president of the International Longevity Center in Brazil. He has been working from 1975 on aging. He was one of the first voices of raise the importance of aging and global issue. He worked 20 years at the University of London and Oxford, where he obtained his master and degree. From 1995 to 2008, he directed the WHO Department of Aging and Health. He worked in active aging policy framework, age-friendly city movement, and he loved and he's a passionate of right of older people. Please, Alex, we listen to you.
My dear friends from the International Association of Geriatrics and Gerontology, it is a real honor to be invited to give this plenary session. I thank the organizers, in particular the scientific committee, and my dear friend, Professor José Ricardo Jauregui. It is an honor not only to invite me as keynote, but also to consolidate a series. After all, I am a veteran at the Congresses of Gerontology. I attended the first one in Germany in 81, and then in New York, Acapulco, Budapest, Adelaide, Vancouver, Rio, Paris, Seoul, San Francisco, Buenos Aires, and here I am on the 11th time. I also show my appreciation to another good old friend, Miguel ACÁNFORA, for being the chair of the session. The theme is inequity. And it is impossible to approach this topic in 2022 without making reference to what we have just gone through and are continuing to, because the pandemic has not finished. It's just giving us the opportunity to get our house in order, or it will strike again. The pandemic is not over. Caution. And perhaps we have not learned much from the lessons it has already given us. What should have been a triumph of science has been ignored by obscurantism. So obscure what we have gone through. And examples are from throughout the world. It is unfortunate. Science illiteracy, health illiteracy has killed hundreds of thousands, if not millions, throughout the world. In particular, the old, the poor, women, racial minorities, be the black where they are minority. In my country, they are considered to be minority. In fact, 56% of the Brazilian population is Afro-descendant. Indigenous people, immigrants, especially if they are illegal. People with limited access to services. And they continue to kill. It's enough to be reminded of the African population in sub-Saharan Africa without access to vaccine. The highest rate is around 10%. They are brewing subvariants, and in this globalized world, we may end up being again the victims. And this has a name: inequity. I will, of course, focus on the example of my country. 4 or 5 times more poor people, black people, indigenous people, those living in the periphery, in our favelas, 4 or 5 times more likely to die from COVID than those that live in the so-called residential areas. My friends, this is obscene. And also what has been behind. I take the example of my home city, Rio de Janeiro. We had built 7 field hospitals, 7. Only 1 functioned for a limited number of 2 months. What does it mean? It was the opportunity for inescrupulous politicians to take money, to siphon money from the public sector, to steal ventilators, to take the opportunity to take money to their homes. Meanwhile, people dying because they didn't have ventilators, oxygen, basic services. They were asphyxiated by the thousands to death. Not only in Rio. Take the example of the capital of the state of Amazon, Manaus, where literally people were again short of breath because the ventilators were being taken away and sold. The oxygen never arrived to their beds, and they died by the thousands. The politicians profiting, stealing, exacerbating what was already obvious: inequality. It's not that the pandemic has invented inequality. It has just brought to the open in a way that it is impossible to ignore. Let me focus again in Brazil. We have created 97 new billionaires in this country since the beginning of the pandemic. Most of them working in the health sector. Is there something wrong or not? Take, for instance, in my country, 1% of the population on the top of the socio-economic ladder, they retain 49.6% of GNP. Yes, not to say half, 49.6% in the hands of these few people, 1% of the population, the remaining 99% with the other half. But if you belong to the poorest quintile, you have 3% of the GNP. Extreme inequality. Obvious. This is expressed in the coefficient, Gini, that measures inequality. The closer to 100, the worse. 10 years ago, it was 980. It was bad enough. Brazil has always been one of the most unequal countries in the world. But 10 years later, last year, it has risen to 89, from 80 to 89, in 1 decade, getting worse. But we are not alone. Inequality is in the increase worldwide. Take another example in my country. 56% of the population live with food insecurity. They don't know if tomorrow they will have the quality or the quantity of food they need and aspire. And yet, in this past decade, Brazil has always been in the league of the 3 most important food exporters in the world. Agrobusiness. They don't create decent jobs. They just create profits for their CEOs, for their owners. Seasonal work without dignity, without security. We're more likely to feed the pigs in China than our population. And we have 21 million people that are starving. that is equivalent to the whole population of the largest metropolitan area in Latin America, São Paulo. They have nothing to eat, neither for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, unless somebody will give food to them. This is unacceptable. And over the last year, 80% increase in people that have fallen below poverty line. Our minimum salary, which is equivalent to $200, is barely enough to buy the basic food basket. You have other expenses. You have to pay electricity. You have to pay the internet for your children to study. You have to buy a gas bottle to cook your food. You have to pay for transport. And yet, that is the reality. And they are not even counted amongst the poor, as if people with one minimum salary would escape poverty. That is the face of inequality, extreme in Brazil, where 50% of the population doesn't have public sewage. We are a country with 220 million people, and we have 210 smartphones. And it is likely that you will have a smartphone in your hand and your feet in the open sewage. This is the image I want to pass to you in terms of inequality. And nobody can age well with dignity if this is the circumstances throughout the life course of those individuals. You may be young today, but you aspire to be an older person tomorrow. And this is not a good way to start. Tremendous disdain for human lives, expressed in the words of our top leader. And so what? What does it matter if the weak, the old, those with disabilities die? Get away. You are a burden to our public sector, particularly those that are weak, with premature non-communicable diseases, the famous comorbidities. The old being considered disposable, unproductive. And he doesn't seem to know that to have an older person in Brazil, in poor families, is what guarantees food in the shelves, electricity bills paid, transport for your children to seek a job. Older people are resources to their families, communities, and societies, not a burden. We counted 700,000 deaths. Number 2 in the world. Number 1, the United States, with over 1 million. Same picture of inequality. But it's not only those who died that were victims. Millions of relatives, loved ones, traumatized by that. And so what? They could not express their bereavement, their grief, their sense of loss. They were unrecognized, unacknowledged. Total lack of compassion, empathy, solidarity. It's painful. It is very painful. Where is my grandmother? Where is my husband? Where is my child? They're dead. They're dead because they were poor, they were weak, they were old. It's not only in Brazil. It's enough to think of what happened, especially at the beginning of the pandemic in rich countries. France, Spain, in Italy, in the United Kingdom, in the United States, in Canada. All the people dying in home care facilities, in residential care, like flies, to the extreme of corpses side by side that people that were still alive. When firemen arrived at those premises, that is what they found. Side by side, a dead person 3-4 days after that, and another person agonized. Where is the dignity? How can we talk about equality if those were the circumstances? 83% of those who died in Canada were residents in residential care facilities. It's also painful for those providing care. Unacknowledged. This army of health professionals and those also who work in the social care, in the front line, exposing themselves, but without the support, especially emotional, especially recognition for all their sacrifices. This is also called inequity. It reminds me of the classic dystopic novel by Albert Camus, The Plague, where he describes that trading town in Algeria in 1849, and the plague arrives. But they live on commerce, so they deny. They don't want the cities around to know that there is plague there. But the reality is very different. Soon, the trading cities around discover that there is plague there, and they encircle that population. And very quickly, the emotional and the physical resources of that population start to suffer. And there they die. Little by little, suffering, denial is not the answer. But it is clear too that Camus was describing not only a biological enemy, he was also warning us of something different, the dangers of authoritarianism, of governments that don't look at the interests of their populations in this name of profits. Profits first. It doesn't matter if people are suffering. It also reminds me of another dystopic novel, George Orwell, 1984. And the two important contributions of this novel is the newspeak. Words start to lose their meaning. Democracy, freedom, justice. Newspeak that precedes fake news that we have seen growing throughout the world, feeding inequality. But George Orwell also creates the powerful image of the big brother. I'm watching you. You behave, or we'll get you. Behind all that, a real tsunami of ages. This word was coined by Bob Butler, in my opinion, the most influential gerontologist of the 20th century, my mentor. He created the International Longevity Center and subsequently I became his successor as the president of the Global Alliance of International Longevity Center. And I have the privilege of being the president today of the ILC Brazil. Bob Butler was a man ahead of his time, visionary. It's enough to say that the year after he coined the word ages, he published a book co-written with his wife, Bernard Lewis, Sex in Old Age, over 50 years ago. He also created the National Institute of Aging within the National Institute of Health in Washington, and was the first chair of geriatric medicine in his native New York. Great Bob Butler, coining the word ages, referring to sexes, to races. And if I could summarize what he expressed by coining the word ages, it is an is, like races, sexes, LGBTs, capacities, ages. They all have 4 I's in common. The first is ideology, a group that believes that you are worth more than another one. I'm a man, you are a woman. I'm white, you are black. I have a disability, you are capable. I'm black, you are white. It's the ideology that will try to convince societies that a group is special and deserves more. The second I, if that is what you believe, that is your ideology, you will institutionalize that ideology. I'm not going to promote you, you're a woman. I'm not going to give you a job, you're old. I'm not going to give you education, you're black. I'm not going to give opportunities, you have a disability. It's always the ideology that will be operationalized by institutionalizing the second I, that ideology. Then comes the third I, interpersonal. Little jokes, all that can diminish your self-confidence, your self-esteem, bullying. And gradually you will start to feel diminished until the objective of the ideology happens. That group that has been discriminated, that has been the victim of racism or sexism or LGBTs or ages, will believe that, yes, I deserve it. I deserve to be discriminated. You internalize ideology, institutionalizing, interpersonal, and finally you internalize. But anywhere in the world, in any country, where you have the fifth I, inequality, this will provide plenty of opportunities for all these isms to be powerful and to feed into the minorities that will suffer as a consequence. Let me remind you of what Angela Davis, the leader against racism in the United States, once said. It's not enough not to be racist. We need to be anti-racist. It is not enough not to be ageist. We need to be anti-ageist. Old people and young people alike There is something that is perverse, but it is universal. Other isms are not universal. You are either a woman or a man. You are either heterosexual or gay or lesbian. You are either black or brown, or you are white. You may have a disability or not, but we all aspire to be old. You may be young today, but if we don't stamp out ages, you will be the victim. And this victimization is waiting for you. You may be the most powerful CEO in the world, but you reach the age of 80 and you'll be a victim of ages. Or you may be a poor person living in a favela, black, disabled. You are equally likely to be the victim of ageism, except that it's even more powerful. Because if you are rich and powerful, you can minimize the effects of that ism, of that ageism, with your power, monetary, financial. Isn't it, Miss Silva? Rita, you're black, you're poor, you live in the periphery. Nobody has cared to provide you with education. You work throughout your life, providing care to others, and now you reach old age and you don't know who's going to look after you. Yes, Rita, you are the victim. And for you, the expressions and the translations of ages are far worse. For all these reasons, we're not going through a pandemic. It is a syndemic. Syndemic. In the same way that we have the word syndrome. If you have fever, if you have muscular pain, headache, if you have running nose, you have flu. It is a combination of signs and symptoms that are overlapping, and then you call that a syndrome, flu syndrome. What we are seeing throughout the world is not a single pandemic. It is the overlapping of many signs and symptoms, perverse, complicating each other. And maybe the coronavirus pandemic is just a rehearsal. Others may come. It is enough for us human beings to continue to treat Mother Earth the way we are. I remind you, Mother Earth is committed to life, not necessarily human lives. If we wanted to destroy ourselves, it's enough to continue to behave the way we are. Irresponsible, killing the ecosystem, decimating what Mother Earth has given us. And Mother Earth may have surprises to us. Other viruses, other biological weapons that are lurking behind the corner, just waiting and take us by surprise, just like the coronavirus. Let us continue to destroy the environment. Let us set fires in the Amazon. Let us ignore global warming. But don't be surprised with the result. I have given examples from my home country. I could give many more examples throughout the world. I will focus on the United States, the richest country in the world, with millions without access to care, to health care. The median family income in the United States in 30 years from 1970 to year 2000, rose at a rate of 1.3% a year. Since then, since the beginning of the century, it has dropped by 0.3%, from 1.2 to 0.3% a year, a period of stagnation. Household income in 2020 was $74,000. If it were not for this stagnation, it would be today 87,000. But who has suffered? Not the rich, not those at the top. They continue to increase their income year after year. The poor have suffered. The gap has increased. I have told you that Gini coefficient that measures inequality in Brazil is 89 today, and it was 80 10 years ago. And the closer to 100, the worst. The United States has a Gini today of, and it is staggering, that 42.7. But it was much less. It was today, 49. In 1990, it was 43. 49. Instead of getting better, inequality is getting worse in the richest country in the world. The 1% of the population in the United States retain 42.5% of GNP. In Brazil, the country famous for its inequality, is 49. This 1% have a median income of 422,000. They earn 27 more than the bottom 99%. But if you are in the poorest quintile, which is a fraction of that, it's the same picture as in Brazil. Yeah. And they are concentrated among the Black, the indigenous, immigrants, especially those that are illegal. They're made invisible. Services don't reach them. They're afraid to go to a health services to get a vaccine against COVID because they've been caught. But everybody is at risk. We live in a globalized world. Those pockets of people that are not being vaccinated because of inequality. Those people in Africa that at the very best have 10% of their populations in the best countries. They are breeding new subvariants like Omicron that came from Africa. You may be surprised next year by new subvariants because you are neglecting through inequality those in our countries that are not having access to vaccines, or those in other countries in this globalized world that may be preparing these new subvariants lurking to catch you. Let us focus again in the United States. In the ranking of life expectancy at birth, they number 37, well below other countries, poorer than them, but less unequal. Examples, even in our continent, from Chile, Costa Rica to Cuba, from Greece, Portugal, and Spain. Inequality kills. Let us look at health-adjusted life expectancy, which is 12 years lower in the United States when compared to Japan, Scandinavian countries, Switzerland. And then you may react out, but they are rich. What about Spain, Portugal, Greece, Uruguay? Health-adjusted life expectancy in the United States is only 2 years above our level in Brazil, with our disparities, with our inequalities. There is something wrong with that health system. There is something wrong with that society. It's not only mine. Inequality is increasing worldwide. It would take 31 years for someone in Zimbabwe to accumulate as much money as an American with median income. I'm not talking about being rich. Median income. According to a study done by the OECD, which included 49 countries, a poor Brazilian today would take 270 years to reach median income, not to be rich, just to reach median income. Do you have 270 years to wait? Is that what we're going to tell young people today? Wait 10 generations, it will be all right. Maybe, maybe not. Because 270 years ago, the poor people in Brazil had a name. They were slaves, and their descendants, Black people, Afro-descendants in Brazil, have not reached median income. Inequity is like a hereditary disease. It passes through generations. Life course of inequalities results in premature age without quality of life. What prospects would young people today would have to age well if they don't have education, don't have the right services, if they don't have access to the basics? What prospects would they have to be good carers to their parents or grandparents if that is the situation in which they live? Reminding you of what the Ottawa Charter for Health Promotion, promulgated by WHO in 1986 in the city of Ottawa. Health is created in the context of everyday's life, where we live, where we work, how we go from A to B and Z, to public transportation, how we get entertainment, how we love. That is what creates health. And these young people that are denied the basics are not having the context in which they can become, as a miracle, healthy older persons. Yet, we are living the longevity revolution. I say that the most important social achievement of last century was the possibility of getting older. It's enough to say that Germany had the highest life expectancy in the world in 1900, 46 years. There is not a single country today with a life expectancy as low as the highest some 100 years ago. But in the same way that the biggest achievement, social achievement of last century was aging, the biggest challenge of the 21st century is to age in the context of inequality. But the century will be very different. Not only we have more and more and more older people, but also less and less and less babies, children, adolescents, young adults. Populations will shrink. I take the example of Brazil. We will reach the peak of our population in 2038. Many countries will be half their populations throughout this 100 years. like Japan, like Russia, like Germany, like other European countries. The only subgroup that will increase year after year within the next 8 decades are older people. By 2100, the largest populations in the world will be number 1, India, number 2, Nigeria with 800 million people, then China, which will be half the population it has today. Then the United States, because it has the capacity to attract immigrants. Don't be xenophobic, because you will need these young people. And then Pakistan or Tanzania. You can imagine the political upheavals that will be created with the sub-Saharan Africa enlarging, and those people trying to escape poverty. The pressures for migration will be enormous. If you think that what you see in the Mediterranean Sea, people desperate to get to Europe, we haven't seen much yet. Then I can only paraphrase Linda Free. Throughout the century, the only renewable source of growth are not going to be soybeans, solar panels, aeolic energy. It's not going to be iron ore. It's not going to be oil. It is going to be older people. Older people are going to be in the increase. And we better invest on these young people that are going to be the older people tomorrow, the only segment of the population that's going to grow. Investing in the future of older people means investing in the future of the whole society, to make them more productive, competitive. Older people that will be healthy are resources to their families, communities, societies, the economy. And their societies will be more sustainable, productive, competitive. Only health matters? I don't think so. I think that in addition to healthy aging, and we are through the decade of healthy aging, active aging is also important. In 2002, WHO launched the Active Aging Policy Framework, which continues to be influential in the policy development in many countries. And the definition is very simple. Is to optimize opportunities for 4 pillars: health, and it does come first. Lifelong learning, you need to accumulate knowledge. Participation, the right to participate in society. And last, security, protection. That is what is going to bring quality of life as you age. I translate this when talking to lay people, the 4 capitals that are needed for you to age well: health, knowledge, social capital. You never know who is going to look after you once you get older and may be dependent. But also, if you can, accumulate financial resources. But how? With unemployment, with inflation, how can you tell me? How can you tell me eat broccoli in the first week of the month if I'm not going to have enough to buy sugar and flour at the end of the month? Inequalities again. With this longevity revolution, our lives are no longer 100-meter sprints. It's like a marathon. And whoever has trained for a marathon knows that you have to accumulate knowledge, you have to have stamina, determination, you have to rehearse, because you never know what's next behind that column around the corner. You have to create reserves to age well. You're going to last 80, 90, 100 years, not 43, which was the life expectancy when I was born in Brazil. How can you tell that you have to accumulate these 4 capitals for people that are illiterate or half illiterate, hungry, unemployed or sub-employed, without access to the basics, health, employment, jobs, food security, education. And lastly, we need to embrace a rights-based approach. I have rights. I don't want anybody to infantilize or be paternalistic to me. I want to be treated with respect. Not only because I'm old. Like last year, we had orchestrated civil society response to WHO, including old age as a disease. We won, but was difficult. And I kept saying, I know I'm going to die old because I am already, but it's not going to be of old age. It's going to be from a disease that may be prevented and can be treated. And if I die, will be a disease with name and surname. We have to stamp out every single form of ageism that we encounter. And this is not only for my benefit, it's preparing for aging of those that are young today and aspire to be old in the future. And this goes together with forging intergenerational harmony, solidarity. Like I can express with this picture that was drawn by a young friend who gave me the privilege of being his mentor. He painted this, expressing the wisdom of elephants, young elephants, thanking the old elephant for whatever this old elephant has done to him. And this old elephant feels the privilege of leaving behind a legacy. That is what we aspire. Thank you.
Okay, Alex, thank you very much for your exposition. It's very hard subject to talk about it. And I think that is one of the biggest problems in this century to be resolved. And the inequity is, in the history, one of the main subjects to resolve. And I think in our countries, especially in Latin America, it's a very, very hard problem to be pointed in the agenda of the politicians and of the gerontologists to be resolved. Thank you again. I have no question for me, and there are no questions in the auditory, but I want to know if you want to remark anything more important to your conference.
No, thank you very much for the invitation. It was an honor to be present at the Congress with a plenary chaired by my good old friend, Miguel. And I have to say, just to emphasize the main message, we are living the pandemic, which has not finished. And this pandemic has brought to the open another pandemic, which is inequity. It is here in the South, but it's also present throughout the developed world. Right now, I'm speaking from London, and we are seeing the disaster that more and more people, especially old people, are falling below the poverty line. If we don't solve this problem, we run the risk of turning the most important social achievement of the last century, which is aging, into a catastrophe for the next century. We need good public policies to respond to the longevity revolution.
Thank you again, and thank you to the auditory, and we continue with the Congress. Thank you very much, Alex.